Okay, so you want to own a construction company. Your name on the truck doors, a skyline full of buildings you can point to and say, I built that. Here's the picture in your head. Here's the problem. This is not a building business. It's a cash timing business wearing a hard hat. You are not paid to build. You are paid to survive the gap between when you spend money and when someone gives it back to you. Everything else, the concrete, the crews, the permits, is just the machinery that gap runs through. Remember that sentence. The rest of this is proof. Construction company is not one business. It's a spectrum, and the two ends barely resemble each other. On one end, the specialty subcontractor, electrician, plumber, HVAC. They own a narrow skill nobody else on the job site has, and it shows in the number. Gross margins of 15% to 25%, often the fattest in the entire industry. On the other end, the commercial general contractor. Bigger contracts, bigger name on the sign, and thinner margins, 10% to 20% gross, sometimes less, because a GC is really just the entity absorbing everyone else's risk to win the bid. Residential builders sit closer to the sub. Leaner jobs, margins around 18 to 25%. Heavy civil and infrastructure contractors sit closer to the GC. Steady government work, net margins around 7 to 8%. Stability instead of upside. The company you pictured owning is almost certainly the GC. Keep that in mind. It's the version with the thinnest margin and the most exposure. The entry price looks small on paper and grows the moment you actually try to bid work. A basic contractor license bond runs somewhere between $100 and $300 a year, depending on the bond amount your state requires. California alone requires a $25,000 license bond, which typically costs around $125 a year for a qualified applicant. General liability insurance for a small contractor runs $500 to $3,000 plus a year. Workers' compensation, if you have employees, adds another $1,000 to $5,000 plus and averages around $254 a month, or roughly $3,000 a year industry-wide. Add license fees, exam costs, and renewals, and you're carrying $2,000 to $5,000 a year in pure compliance overhead before you've poured a single yard of concrete. That's the license to operate. It is not the license to bid big jobs. For that, you need bonding capacity. A surety underwriter deciding how much project risk they'll vouch for on your behalf, based on your balance sheet, your track record, and your personal credit. No bonding capacity, no public contracts, no large private jobs. This is the real gate, and it has nothing to do with how well you can build. One modeled estimate for a small general contracting startup puts total capital needs, licensing, insurance, equipment, and a cash cushion at roughly $650,000. Verify model dependent varies enormously by market and scale. A solo operator with a truck and a trade license can start for $7,000 to $15,000. A small crew-based company typically needs $25,000 to $70,000 or more just to cover compliance, equipment, and payroll before the first invoice clears. Here's the trap nobody puts in the brochure: retainage. On almost every contract, the owner withholds 5% to 10% of every single payment until the project is substantially complete. On a $2 million contract at 10% retainage, that's $200,000 of your earned, completed work sitting frozen, sometimes for months after you've already paid your subs and your crews in full. Read that again. You already paid the labor and the materials. The 10% you haven't collected yet is money you're financing for the client, for free. And it compounds. Run 5 jobs at once, and you can have hundreds of thousands of dollars of your own earned revenue locked up at any given moment. Money that never shows up as a problem on a monthly profit and loss statement, because on paper, you're profitable. In your bank account, you're starving. Then there's the slower burn: certified payroll on public jobs, prevailing wage compliance, insurance premiums that spike after a single claim, and change order disputes that can freeze payment on an entire project while lawyers argue over who approved what. This is where good contractors go broke doing everything right. Now the part that stings. The actual act of building barely makes you money. Industry-wide, average net profit margin in construction sits around 5% to 8%, based on Construction Financial Management Association data. 6.3% pre-tax in 2023, up from 5.0% in 2022. Even the best-run firms in the country, the top performers, tend to land around 10 to 12% net. Do the math on that. Bid a $1 million job, run it well, hit the top of the industry range, and you keep somewhere around $100,000 to $120,000 before tax. And that's the good outcome. Most contractors keep $50,000 to $80,000. One underestimated line item, one weather delay, one dispute over scope, and that thin margin is gone. Gross margins look healthier, 15% to 20% for general contractors. But gross margin isn't what pays your mortgage. Net margin is. And the gap between gross and net is where overhead, bad estimating, and slow-paying clients quietly eat your lunch. The building itself, the actual product you're selling, is a low-margin pass-through. Most of the contract value goes straight out the door to subcontractors and material suppliers. You're not selling a building. You're routing money through yourself and keeping a thin slice. Here's where it gets interesting. You thought you were buying a construction company. You were actually buying a balance sheet business. One that makes its real money two ways that have nothing to do with construction skill. First, the float. You collect payment on a schedule that's slower than the schedule you pay your subs and suppliers. If you can stretch payables to 60 days while collecting in 30, you're running a working capital arbitrage on every job, whether or not the building itself is profitable. Second, change orders. The base contract is often bid at razor-thin margin, sometimes near cost, just to win the job in a competitive field. The real profit shows up afterward, in the change orders, the scope additions, the while we're in there work, which frequently carries 20% to 40% margins because there's no competing bid on that line item. The client is already committed, and you're the only contractor standing in the building. The construction is the loss leader. The change order is the business. Meet Katerra. Founded in 2015 by former Flextronics CEO Michael Marks, Katerra set out to fix exactly the fragmentation we just described by owning everything itself. Design, manufacturing, supply chain, on-site construction, all under one roof, funded with over $2 billion, mostly from SoftBank's Vision Fund. The company recorded $2.78 billion in financial losses across 2018, 2019, and 2020. In December 2020, SoftBank injected another $200 million just to keep it alive. 3 months later, its primary lender, Greensill Capital, collapsed into insolvency. And that lender's failure triggered massive liquidity constraints and problems bonding new projects, according to Katerra's own bankruptcy filings. By June 2021, Katerra filed for Chapter 11, listing liabilities as high as $10 billion against assets of roughly $500 million to $1 billion. Verify. The wide range as reported. Employees were told the company would shut down without severance or payout for unused time off. Katerra later sold its Tracy, California facility for $21.25 million and its Spokane, Washington factory for $50 million. Pennies against the capital it had burned. Sit with that for a second. Katerra didn't die because it couldn't build. It died because it tried to own the entire capital-intensive supply chain, factories, inventory, logistics, on top of construction's already thin margins, and it never solved the one problem every contractor solves or dies from: cash flow. It out-engineered the industry and outspent its own balance sheet. Clients don't hire construction companies rationally. They hire relationships. Developers and property owners build sticky ties to their known subcontractors, engineers, and general contractors over years, which is a documented reason Katerra struggled to displace incumbent relationships, even with better technology and more capital behind it. Trust, not price, decides who gets the next job. Meanwhile, the legal layer quietly rewrites your math. Mechanics' lien laws let you place a claim against the property itself if you're not paid. A powerful protection, but one that takes time, lawyers, and often damages the client relationship to use. Prevailing wage laws on public work can raise labor costs 20 to 40% above open market rates. Verify varies significantly by jurisdiction and trade, which reshapes your bid math on government contracts entirely. None of this shows up in the glossy brochure. All of it shows up in your actual margin. Good year. Your pipeline stays full, retainage releases on schedule, change orders get approved without a fight, and you land in the top tier. Net margin around 10 to 12%. On $5 million in revenue, That's $500,000 to $600,000 before tax. You reinvest in equipment, hire a project manager, breathe. Bad year. One client goes slow to pay. One dispute freezes $150,000 in retainage for 8 months. Material costs spike mid-project on a fixed-price contract, and a workers' comp claim doubles your insurance premium at renewal. That same $5 million in revenue can produce a net margin near zero. Or negative, even though every job individually looked fine on the estimate sheet. This is not a downturn story. This is a normal year with one bad client in it. The math doesn't forgive that. So picture it again. Your name on the truck door, the skyline you can point to. A construction company is not a business. Surviving the gap between other people's money is the business.